Welcome to The Joe Show, a podcast that has real conversations with real people about topics that really matter to you. And now your podcast host, Joe Amaral.
Welcome back to The Joe Show, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time and joining with us today. And I have to admit, it has been a long time since I've done a podcast, and I actually went on my website and checked it out. The last one I did was August 2020, if you can believe it. And it's not because I didn't have anything to say. I just didn't know what kind of topics to cover because there was so much going on in the world. Everything that's been going on with COVID. And then you had racial injustice. Then we had my trips to Liberia. We've had lockdowns, so much going on. And I really didn't know what to talk about next. So I was kind of just biding my time. And then out of nowhere, someone I've known for, I think since about an hour after he was born, I've known him. He reached out to me and started asking some really good questions. And he said to me, hey, I've been listening to the podcast and, I like it. And then he made a joke about a podcast and I said, hey, why don't you come on? These are really great questions. These are questions that other people are asking. So why not capture them on video and tape, and then we can share them with other people. So not only is he my first non-household member who's a guest on the show today, he's the first Gen Zer, which I'm really excited about because I love the way they think. They have a fresh way of looking at things. And so today I'm really pleased to have my nephew on the show with us. Liam, thank you so much for being on The Joe Show, sir.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Now listen, before we go any further, I got to ask, and you can be honest, like don't say it's because, it's my show, but who's your favorite uncle named Joe?
That's a tough question. I don't know. I have so many. So I think my favorite, it's got to be you, Joe. I'll be honest.
Gotta be me.
Joe.
All right.
You're the
All right.
best.
We can continue with the show. You passed your first hurdle.
Thank goodness.
So Liam, I know you just finished doing a one-year Bible kind of like degree, like a course. Tell us a little bit about what you were studying and what kind of course it was.
Yeah. So I did a one-year program called Gcbi, which is the Great Commission Bible Institute. It's a program that started off in Florida, in Sebring, Florida, by a professor named Randy Smith. And our church kind of decided that we want to do a school for young people. So they kind of took that curriculum that Mr. Randy had kind of put out, and we started doing it here in the north, in Canada. And
so you weren't able to go to Florida and do it, unfortunately?
No, unfortunately not. Yeah, that would have been cool. But the interesting thing that kind of relates to our topic today is that Randy kind of did the same thing that you did, where he did tours, and he lives in Israel. I think he lives in Israel for 6 months out of the year.
Okay.
So he does a lot of those kind of tours and stuff. So we studied the Bible from cover to cover. We started off in Genesis, finished off in Revelation.
Wow.
And yeah, we did it all in 8 months, and it's very
8
interesting.
months.
8 months. Yeah. Yeah. The craziest thing is actually the first 8 days of the experience, we did what's called the Bible experience.
Yeah.
We read the whole Bible, page to like all cover to cover in
Whoa.
8 days. We did it 8 days. We were reading for 12 hours a day, and that was pretty crazy.
Well, hang on a sec. 12 hours a day?
Yeah, we were waking up starting at 8:30, taking an hour break for lunch, hour break for dinner, and then you're reading again until bedtime. Pretty crazy.
I've never heard of that before. That is unbelievable, Liam.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be honest. It was the first time I'd read certain books in the Bible that I never read before, but that kind of just random books. But something that's also very interesting is like because of my teacher's kind of experience in the whole Jewish culture and all that, we spent a lot of time in the Old Testament, which is something that I feel like a lot of Christians, maybe especially nowadays, don't really do. They,
For sure.
kind of typical books, the Gospels, the epistles, and all that, and you don't really read too much of the Old Testament literature. But I had the opportunity to do that.
Look, we're calling it the Old Testament. Like,
yeah,
it used to be good, but it's all we got a newer, shinier version. Let's stay there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but that's something I had the opportunity to do, so that was pretty cool.
So, you guys read through the Bible in a short amount of time, and they took a little more time, and you started to unpack the books. But even in 8 months, you really can't do the Bible justice in 8 months.
No, for sure.
So, what led you to kind of reach out to me and say, "Hey, Uncle Joe, I got these questions"?
Yeah. So, in that kind of the COVID lockdown, our church has been kind of figuring out new ways to have like community interactions with the church online. And something that we were doing, we talked about this in our first conversation. We were doing the Seder meal, the Seder dinner, however you call it.
Yeah, the Passover Seder, yeah.
Passover Seder. And it was never something that I really understood or knew about.
No.
And I was doing some research and, lots of different viewpoints coming at me. Some saying it's cultural appropriation, some saying we should do this, some saying, we're putting ourselves in the shoes of Jesus and his people. And I didn't really understand. So I kind of just messaged you and was like, hey, you do this kind of stuff. You've written books. What do you think about it? And you gave me a good answer. I'll be honest, I was still a little confused because it's something that, like you said, there's a lot of depth in a lot of these conversations. And so, yeah, that's kind of how this first started.
Okay. Well, I mean, you mentioned the Passover Seder and you say, well, I didn't know a lot about it. Well, the truth is a lot of Christians don't know a lot about it. Yeah. They've heard the term, they read it in the Bible, and they assume, it's Old Testament. It's something they used to do. It's not something we have to do anymore or even really learn about. So let's kind of go over a little bit, Liam, over some of the questions that you were asking, and I'll give some of the answers that I gave. And, thank you for being honest and saying, well, I still wasn't too sure about some things, and we'll kind of drill down a little bit deeper, see if we can help you out. So do you remember like the questions that you were asking about?
I think my biggest question was like, is it cultural appropriation kind of thing? Because I know that my understanding was that we are Christians, other people are Jews, and it's much separated. I knew obviously that our history is from the Jewish people, and maybe that's wrong to say, I'm not 100% sure, but that my kind of confusion was that that's a cultural thing. It's not really a set in stone religious thing that we have to do, but it's kind of their culture. So is Christians doing that kind of just to get the feeling of it? Is that wrong or is it bad? That was my kind of big question.
Yeah, and that was a really great question. We talked about it a little bit. So let's just kind of review, is it cultural appropriation? Should Christians be kind of putting our hands in a bag that doesn't belong to us, that belongs to another culture? The thing with Christianity and Judaism of the first century is that like we're tied together. It's like when you take two different flavors of syrup and you put them in a glass of water, they become this new thing, and it's almost impossible, if not impossible, to completely separate the two. And I feel like that's what happened with Christianity and Second Temple, first century Judaism, is that's the faith that flavored Jesus and his disciples and everything we read about in what we call the New Testament. So it's kind of hard to separate ourselves from that. But I will say this, I don't believe there's anywhere in the Bible that teaches this. And I never want to start off a conversation by saying, well, I think, or I believe. Who cares what Joe Amaral thinks or what he believes? I mean, maybe off books, but if we're going to talk about it seriously, it doesn't even matter what Liam believes or what Joe believes. Is what does the Bible actually teach? And it's this. That Passover, as we understand it today, it's not for salvation, right? That's the most important thing I can say, is that's not like, oh, we don't celebrate Passover, so we're not good Christians, or, we're not really saved because we're not celebrating it. There's nothing in the Bible that teaches that you have to observe or even conduct Passover for salvation. There was only one lamb that had to die on Passover, and that was Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago. And so he fulfilled the Passover, right? He was the Passover lamb, the perfect sacrifice who died on our behalf, who sinned, satisfied the justice of God, and all those other theological kind of terms. And the truth is, Liam, we can't even celebrate Passover today because the real Passover was taking a lamb to the temple and sacrificing it. So we can't really celebrate Passover. We can commemorate it. Right. And this is where I think we got to talking about the Last Supper or the final Passover that Jesus had with his disciples. And I think we kind of left it there. So let's go down a little bit deeper. What are the questions?
The question. So I completely understand what you're saying about how like we don't have, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says you have to do the Passover, because that's not what saves you. Like you said, Jesus was the Savior. That's, the Bible, I forget what verse it says. The only way to heaven is through Jesus. There's no other way to get to heaven, right?
Done deal.
Yeah. But then some other, in my research, kind of another reason for doing the Passover Seder or practicing any kind of Jewish traditions as a non-Jewish person was that it puts us in the feet. It puts us in the feelings, or it puts us in the shoes of those people to see how it feels. But then my kind of like, my disagreement with that was that Well, what we're really doing is we're practicing modern Jewish people's interpretation of that old ceremony. So it's not even like we're actually putting ourselves into Jesus's feet. We're putting ourselves at modern day Jewish people's feet that
That's a
are
good point. Okay.
putting themselves back. So that was kind of, I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that we should be doing that to put ourselves in the feet, like back in their shoes? Because if it's not for saving, it's not for our own, our soul, then could it be used as a kind of a practical, oh, this is how it felt to be a Jewish believer back in the time of Jesus?
Yeah, well, actually, that's the first time I've heard it put that way. So that's one point for the Gen Zers. That, we have to be careful that when we do look at Passover today, that it's not about observing the modern day cultural practices. If we're going to learn from Passover, it's got to be the kind of Passover that Jesus would have celebrated, right? Not our friends living today. Like today, they have gefilte fish for Passover. Well, that wasn't a thing at the time. So that's actually a really, really good point. So let's go past that and say, yeah, it's not about mimicking what we see happening in the Jewish world around us today. That's not what we're called to do. But when we observe or when we celebrate or we even commemorate the Passover, we have to look at what was Jesus doing 2,000 years ago. And if we're observing and learning from the Passover that he held with his disciples, then it's a whole new ballgame. There is a lot that we can learn. I don't have it here, but we were talking about, remember, Liam, the bread?
Yep.
That flat matzah bread, no leaven, no sin, it has bruised, stripes, and pierced, just like Jesus had. So when he took that bread and he said, "This is my body," that's not cultural appropriation. And that's like totally getting and understanding what he was saying about what was going to happen to him.
Yeah.
And so I feel that as long as we're doing it, to be able to identify with what he was going through and what he was trying to tell them, guys, this is going to be me like in 12 hours here. Like I'm going to be broken like this bread, thrown to the ground. And if we come at it from that angle, that we're not trying to be something we were never designed to be. I mean, God made us Portuguese and half French Canadian. I mean, if he wanted us to be something else, he would have made us that way. So we should never try to become another culture or another race, because he would have made us that if that's what he wanted for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's not to say that our own is the perfect one. Our own race or culture is the perfect culture. There's obviously lots to learn from other cultures. And I think I agree with what you're saying. That makes sense. That I think what you're saying is like, it's not our culture. We shouldn't be trying to become something we're not. But we can still adapt some of those things, and they're going to be beneficial to us. And another thing is that what you're saying about like the matzah bread, for example, that was a Jewish tradition, and Jesus used that to show it was a symbol of him, right? And what was going to happen to him.
Because his audience would have understood that. Absolutely, yeah.
So I guess maybe it's not really a question. It's just a thought. Is that like that old thing that the Jews would understand passed over to Christianity, and that Christians would understand that because Christ, that was a direct correlation between Christ. The matzah bread, for example, let's say, was a correlation between Christianity and Judaism. Mm-hmm. But now there's probably other things I'm thinking, I guess it's not really a question, but there's probably other things that don't necessarily have correlation to both Christianity and Judaism, things that we kind of leave behind. Now, this is not to be confused with the Old Testament is to be left behind and the law is to be left behind. I don't believe that's true. I think you would say the same. Mm-hmm. But there are probably some things that would be left behind. Is that fair to say or no?
Well, I mean, there are some things that were cultural in nature. There was dress codes that applied to the people living at the time, based on the region of the world that they lived in. That totally made sense to them. But today they don't really fit, for our lifestyle and for where, in the world that we're living. And I think what you said is good. It's not about, becoming something different. Like I don't have to look, and I don't want this to come out wrong, but like I don't have to look Jewish or look non-Jewish. It's okay to look like me. I can come to church and worship God, just in the way that I am and the way that you are, in who I am as a person. And I don't want people to come away from this thinking, we should become more, Jewish. No, that's not what we're saying. It doesn't matter if you wear the hat or you wear the clothes or you wear something. It's not going to make you any more saved or Christian than you are already.
Yeah.
But what I want people to take away from this, and people who know me, know my teaching, is that no, let's learn from it. So the symbols are there for a reason, because there's a meaning behind them. So why did Jesus say that? Why did he do that? Why did Matthew write this way? And when we drill down to that first century culture, I always tell people, the Bible is written in black and white with a few red lines in the Gospels, but there's so much more color on the page when we start to learn about the culture. I work in Liberia in West Africa, and if I say, let me teach you about the Hebraic roots, they have no idea what that is. Like a root, like a potato root. What kind of root are you talking about? Like, is it a Jewish plant? No. So I had to come up with another way to teach the Hebraic roots, because it wasn't translating across the cultures. And so now they say, Pastor Joe takes us behind the curtain, or he goes backstage and he shows us what's happening. So when we go backstage and, we think, okay, here's Matthew. He's observing what Jesus is doing. He's watching the Pharisees. He's watching the Romans. He's watching the Zealots. He's watching all of these groups. And so he's writing in a way that the audience at the time would understand. So if I want to get everything that Matthew is saying, I can't just be, in 2021, some guy living in Milton. I got to go back and try to get in his head and see what he was seeing. And when I understand that, I say, oh, that's why he wrote that, because in that time period, the Romans were doing this, but the Zealots were believing this, and the Pharisees, okay. So that's what I advocate, is not becoming something different, but appreciating the roots of our faith. Does that make sense? Yeah,
and that's something I feel like our culture today is very like, you got to be who you are, you stick to what you know, and then kind of, if you're trying to dig deep, maybe you're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're very skeptical about maybe doing research and kind of digging deep into other people's beliefs and stuff. But like you're saying, it's super important, because there's a lot of things in the Bible that are not very clear at a first glance. Like there's lots of things where with no context and no history, you're not really gonna get much from it, right? And that's a question I have. God do that? It's kind of something that confuses me. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's like, why does God? I mean, I understand God wrote it for the people back then. He also wrote it for us, obviously, but it's kind of confusing to me that, there's a lot of stuff back here that is not only for, but it makes complete sense to the people back then, but it makes not a lot of sense to us. So that's something that confuses me sometimes. But that being said, I got
a quote for you. This is what I tell people. I say the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. That kind of, right? It was written for us, but not to us, not in a way that Liam Amaral in 2021, it wasn't written in, a 21st century Canadian or westernized style. It was written in a style for the people at the time.
Yeah.
So it was for us, but not to us. And that should change the way that we come to the scriptures. Because I've been in parts of the world, man, I've been in, I don't know how many countries around the world, and some of the stuff I hear pastors saying, about what the Bible truly means, I'm like going, oh, that's not what it means. And then it gets so off the mark, because when we don't understand the original, what we do is we add our own to it to try and fill in the gaps, and we change it.
Yeah.
It's like having a recipe from the old country, and there was only certain herbs that grew in that part of the world, and you're like, well, we don't have that anymore, so let me add this to it. Now, it still will be a good dish, but it's not the dish that was intended to be.
Yeah, that's interesting, because, I feel like a lot of people would put things that are not necessarily bad into their teaching.
Right.
Things that are relevant, things that are helpful, but not things that are biblical, maybe. Would that be a fair thing to say?
It would be. That's a really nice way of saying it. You should run for politics. That was very good. We don't mean to put heresy in the Bible, but we put it there all the time. And we do it with such sweetness and with such good intent. But when we change the original meaning of the text, it starts to mutate towards heresy, and that begins to perpetuate, and then that becomes gospel. Even though that's clearly never what Jesus meant, it's never what Paul meant, but an early church father or a big time pastor 50 years ago said something, and that has become the accepted truth, even though it's different from what the Bible says. And unfortunately, that happens more often than we'd like to admit, I think.
Yeah. That's another, maybe kind of a side topic away from our main topic of this conversation, but like the whole big kind of idea of denominations and everything. Each denomination has, different views on different things. This is kind of like what you're saying with maybe a pastor back then said a big thing and it kind of got taken. That there's no, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there's no denomination that has everything 100% correct. And I think it's impossible to maybe have a denomination or a perfect church, right? There's no such thing as a perfect church.
No, I mean, people in those denominations might think that they're perfect, and people in those churches might think they're perfect. And yeah, but you're right. The truth is, no, there's no one denomination that has everything figured out. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I guess that would go back to, views on what happens to Jewish people, or, how you would interpret the Old Testament. There's lots of different views on it and lots of different things that people
there's so many things. Like even, people have almost come to exchanging blows and going to fights over whether, a woman should have her hair a certain way or whether a man should wear a hat. And we've divided churches and we've divided congregations over these things that are so inconsequential because they're not salvation related. They're not rooted in salvation at all. And when he talked about the denominations, I used to travel into a lot of different denominations, and everything but the Catholic Church, really. Presbyterian, United, Methodist, Anglican, Baptist, Pentecostal, you name it. And I would always say, I'm not here to promote any kind of denomination. What I'm here teaching, it's not just interdenominational, it's actually pre-denominational. Okay.
What does that mean?
So pre-denominational, meaning before we start arguing over what this means and that means, can we all agree that Jesus is Lord and that he died for our sins? Yes. Okay. That's what I'm here to preach today. I'm here to teach you stuff that's pre-denominational, not just interdenominational.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think because I don't listen to that many podcasts or I don't read that many like Christian news media and stuff, but from the little I do, it feels like that's really not at the root of people's conversations anymore. They're always like, there's a lot of fluff around it. Like you're saying, the things that are very denominational, not the important backbone to our beliefs, right? The backbone to our beliefs would be Jesus died for our sins. And if we accept him, we go to heaven. You know what I mean? We have eternal life with him. But I feel like a lot of our conversations today and a lot of what people claim, they would die on this hill of this doctrine or this so-and-so. And I think, it's important to do your research and spend your time thinking about the important things, because there's always going to be, arguments on, I don't know, I can't think of many doctrinal things, but lots of those things are going to be something that people fight over.
The rapture, speaking in tongues, prophecy, to name a few. We can do like 100 shows on those topics, but that's not what we're here for. But I hear exactly what you're saying. It's we get hung up on our distinctives. So this denomination, like we believe really in speaking in tongues. So we just focus on that. This one says it's about justice in the world. So we're just big on justice, and we all we focus on our things, and the other overarching things get kind of put to the side. And you said that we should all agree that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, right? You would think that would be the foundation of almost every sermon we hear in church, because that's why we gather. That's why we're Christians. But the times that I was a guest speaker, Liam, in a church, and the pastor would get up and read something, or if it was a more traditional church, they have their standard readings, and they would read 9.9 times out of 10, it was from the epistles, something that Paul wrote. And maybe something for the Psalms or the Proverbs. That's about as Old Testament-y as they would get. Yeah. But to actually hear somebody get up and read, hey, listen, this is what Jesus said in Matthew 14. We've gotten away from the crux that is the cross, and we've got hung up on all these other doctrines. And so I'm hoping that out of our conversation today, Liam, that it's going to help you to understand that it's not about, becoming like the Old Testament, and it's not about eating or not eating certain foods. It's not about what day we worship on. All those things are things that we can have conversations about, but they're not what really, really matters. What really, Jesus is the center. Like everything the Old Testament pointed to him, and then everything the New Testament confirmed that he was what the Old Testament said was coming. Yeah. And I just feel like as the church, especially now, people are asking questions, through this whole pandemic, and people are reevaluating their beliefs and their faith system. And I don't think people care like what our views on the rapture are. They want to know, is like, how am I going to make it through COVID? Or I lost somebody to COVID. Where are they now? What happens to my grieving family?
Yeah.
Like, we need to be able to respond to people in the need and the situation they're going in, that they're going through now.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. That's important, especially now. Yeah, you're right. Maybe we could spend another podcast doing that together, because I got enough questions about that too. So.
So you're assuming you're coming back as a guest for?
Yes, I'm invited. Hey, I said you're my favorite Uncle Joe. Does that not get me another ticket?
That's true. That gets you at least a second episode.
Okay, let's go. That's good. I like that.
No, I love being able. A lot of times when I was doing TV, I was always talking to people, my age and older, and that's fine. But we all have the same perspective, and when nothing new is being introduced and challenging us, we all just kind of get stale and talk about the same stuff. So I appreciate you coming on and asking some of these tougher questions. And other students who are in your course, if they have questions, they can either ask you, or if they want to come on with you and ask questions. We say at the intro of the show, we want to have real conversations. With real people about things that matter. And so getting that younger, how old are you now, Liam?
I'm 18. I'll be 19 in 2 months.
Okay. So, 18, you see the world completely different than I do. You were born into a different world. Technology and the internet have played a role in your life that, people my age and older could never even begin to understand. So we need to hear from you. Like, we need you to challenge us. We need you to push us to become better, to understand, hey, why are we saying this? Not just to be a bother, but like, we need you to push us. So thanks for coming on. I know it's not easy to do a podcast and be so formal, but I appreciate you just, being honest and asking those questions.
I appreciate you having me. There's got to be some young person to question the old people like you. So.
All right. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you. You know what? I didn't think I was old until about a year ago. And I'm pretty sure I'm old. But no, I appreciate having you on. And let's do this again. For sure. Think up some more questions. And we can even talk about it ahead of time a little bit. So before we come on and know what we want to discuss. And, and if it's a hard question, let's go for it, man. I'm open to it. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for being on. And everybody listening or watching this on YouTube, thanks for being with us. Make sure you pop over to joeamaral.org and go over to the podcast section, and you can look at some of the archive shows that we have on the website there. And if you have any ideas or questions that you'd like us to address in upcoming episodes, let us know, and we'll do our best to answer them. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Joe Show.